I think that that judo has a lot more to give you. I ensured that I had grip control. So Sode was my favorite technique.
Okay, guys, Dave Loesch out there, Dad Bod Judo. Hey, we're on a podcast today. I got a special guest, Lauren Meece, former Olympian. I am so excited. I can't stand it. I'm going to get into these questions. If you follow Lauren and her journey, she's a lot of good things to say. I can't wait. I always love to talk to Olympians, and I got one on the show today. So let's get at it. Lauren, how are you doing today?
Awesome. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm curious. Take me through your journey from starting judo and all the way up to the 2000 Olympics. What was that like for you?
Try to be brief with it because I have to go on and on. I actually started in gymnastics when my brother was doing judo because he was kind of a scrawny kid. And I was a pretty timid little girl. I was very shy, didn't speak that often in public. And my parents, I think, just got tired of taking us to 2 different recreational programs. So they decided to put me in judo just based on my timid nature. And I started at a recreational program with a guy named Bobby Vignes. And I ended up transferring to Budokan Judo Club in Hialeah with Abelio Garcia. And for me, he's a legend. I absolutely love my coach. And one of my first judo tournaments that I ever went to, I actually still have brief memories of it. I was about 5 years old. And I remember losing and getting pinned. And I looked back at the video and I was just screaming in terror, reaching out for my dad. Dad. But the feeling is the one thing that I remember the most, the feeling of losing. I hated it. I despised it and I feared it and I didn't want it anymore. And so there was some kind of switch that went off in my mind. And from there on out, I just had this crazed need and aggression for judo because it was a sincere outlet for me. So from that point, working with Abelio, he really brought my judo to another level. And I started going to all the, JO. Back then it was like, JOs, JIs, JFs, I think, and doing the triple crown circuits that we used to call it. And so I was climbing that ladder in the triple crown circuits and, regularly becoming a triple crown winner. And I think I kind of developed a little bit too early because I competed in the Olympics when I was 17. I made the team when I was 16. And I started transferring into the senior circuit around the age of 13. And I hit the national podium. I hit some bronze medals in the mid 90s. And then in 1999, I went in because there was a girl named Terry Fujikawa that I had a difficulty beating. And she basically just decided to step away from judo. And one of my teammates from the Olympics, Amy Tong, came up to me right before my final gold medal match in 99. And said, hey, if you win this, you're going to be eligible to travel with us and make the Olympic team. And I was like, what? I had no idea. I was 16. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just excited to be there and possibly get a gold medal at nationals. And from there, it just kept going. And on my junior circuit, I did like Pan Am championships. I won Pan Am juniors. But it went from winning Pan Am juniors to winning senior nationals to just off to Japan, doing the European tour, being around all of these individuals that are in their mid-20s. While I was just this tiny little 16-year-old girl trying to figure out my way in life. But it was a phenomenal experience. I went to World Championships as well. I finished with a 9th place, lucky finish. And that, I think, was my final solidification for the Olympic qualifier. And then I also got a bronze medal at the Pan Am American Games. And I actually fought my last 2 matches with a broken hand. I remember my coach, my dad, coming up to me and telling me, this is your choice. I broke it I had 4 matches. I think I broke it in my 2nd match. And they ended up having to shoot some type of numbing agent in my hand so I could continue fighting. And I lost to Amaria Savone. And then I went into the bronze medal match and actually won my match with a broken hand and ended up having to put a screw in it to sort of weld those bones back together. And then I went on to the World Championships. And from there on out, it was just ensuring that my training was in place. But I had a lot of other injuries. I had concussions. I ended up tearing a ligament in my right elbow, and I had to get a cadaver to fix it up. So long story short, I went to the Olympics with very little expectations. And, I was one and done. I will say I was more proud of my training camp performances because there was no pressure. I think at that age, if you're that good, when you step into such a large international stage, your brain kind of turns off and you go into this fight or flight mechanism that's not really a healthy type of fight or flight mechanism. But I will say in the training camps, I was going toe to toe with some of the medalists at that age. And I remember the Belgian girl that actually won a bronze medal that year. I remember slamming her with a soda right in front of her teammates, and she looked at me and she had this look on her face. And I just remember being like so afraid of these older individuals because they were so much stronger than me. I might have had a talent, but I didn't necessarily have, mid-20s strength level. But all in all, it was a great experience. I found out as an adult that I have Asperger's, and I truly believe that without judo, I wouldn't have blossomed into the individual that I am today. From there, I did coaching after the Olympics when I retired, and then I worked for the government for a significantly long period of time, and I took a hiatus from that, and now I'm back with you. And I absolutely love it. I'm so happy to be back. It's the only thing that's ever helped my Asperger's, to be honest with you, and I didn't realize that until I was well into adulthood and got that diagnosis. Well, it's not really a diagnosis anymore, but that's me.
You mentioned the hating to lose, like so bad, so it's like that mindset of the hating to lose that much. What I've seen is like like almost the X factor of like really excelling.
Yeah, I think there is a commonality in that. I don't know what it is. There's this fire that ignites inside of you, and you get hungry to be a winner.
You were at the top, at the Olympics, could produce in your weight class. What other aspects do you think makes someone really excel? Like, what do they need? If you were going to give a recipe for somebody coming up, what would that be? What would those psychological strategies be?
For me, I think my brain at a very young age decided that I'm going to be an Olympian. My mind made a decision. I committed to it, and I knew it was going to happen. I didn't know when. I was surprised that it happened so early in my teenage years. But I made that decision, and there was no going back from that decision. It was something that I drew a line in the sand for myself. And I think that that's part of being a successful individual, period, in life. When you make that final commitment and you stick to it, your brain doesn't have the ability to say, well, no, I'm going to back out now. It's almost like you make a promise to yourself about something that you're going to reach to make sure that you become the better human being you want to be. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. So what do you teach your guys? How do you get
my students?
Yeah. What do you say?
I'm actually a lot more focused on recreational judo, and a lot of people think that that's like the easy way out. But for me, I know in 1996 we were somewhat embarrassed about our performance when we hosted the Olympic Games in Atlanta. And now that we have the 2028 Olympics being on our home turf again, for me, without a fan base as an athlete, it makes things a little bit lonelier. And I know that the majority of judo athletes do not care about recognition, and I didn't either until I was done with the Olympics and realized that I had maybe 3 to 6 clinics that I could put on, and that was that. So I teach them more so about what judo can give you as a human being, what it can teach you, how you can become a superhero, where you get injured and you realize that your mind can overcome those things a lot faster than you initially believed that it could. So for me, the core spirit of judo is really what I teach. And I have veered away because the Olympics was not my favorite memory from my judo career or from my judo lifestyle. It was the traveling. So those favorite moments that I've always held on to throughout my life is really what I sell judo on, that it makes you a better human being. And that majority of judokas are very successful people. We have doctors, we have lawyers, we have business owners. The list goes on. And there's something to be said about the perseverance that judo teaches. You might not go to the Olympics, but it will ensure that you are a better human being for it, for participating in it.
The experience you go through, and you don't really think about, the traveling and the people you meet. I mean, at the end of the day, you have friends all over the world. You've never ever would have met without it. You can,
Exactly.
which is really cool. And it's like, every year you go to nationals, and it was almost like a little reunion. It was people that you've been training with and competing against for many, many years, or, become very good friends. So it's kind of cool, and that bond is incredible. Like you don't have a better, like even like my wrestling buddies from high school still, if we run into each other, it's like you go way back to the 80s, it's like all of a sudden you transfer. Yeah. I think you make a good point. I think people have to realize that the winning is a result, but when you are building yourself as you go through that, like you said, you do become a better person just in general, because you realize like it humbles you too, because there's always somebody that beat the crap out of you. So you're not like walking around like a hot shot all the time, because you know how tough it is, which is kind of cool.
The first time I went to Japan, I was fighting a young lady. I think she was a purple belt or a brown belt. And, your frame of mind, like in the States, when you fight somebody that's lower ranked, you're like, okay, well, let me kind of be a little more passive with the situation. And she absolutely slammed me. And I think I was probably 14 or 15. And I remember that gut punch of humility that I had. Like, oh, I don't have to go easy with her. This girl's going to slam me. Like, I have to, wow, and I had a difficult time a couple rounds in Randori until I got the flow of the motion. Obviously you kind of start adapting to people as you fight them, but that was a really humbling experience for me, because when you go outside of that box and you travel internationally and you realize that no matter what, there's somebody out there that's better than you. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be the absolute best in the world, you still have to work harder. You still have to work harder. So there's a point too where you realize what your limits are. And again, it shows you who your true self is. That makes any sense. But yeah, going back to what you said with wrestling, the wrestlers and the judo players, I remember, hung out a lot at the Olympic Training Center. And I think there was that level of grit that a lot of individuals have. I think one of my former teammates married a wrestler, a couple of them married wrestlers, actually. So it's interesting to see that dynamic that you mentioned, that grit that you just, experience as a judoka or as a wrestler, creates those bonds that can't be broken.
Yeah, still proud of my cauliflower ears.
I ensured at all costs that I did not get cauliflower ears. My vanity wouldn't allow it.
Yeah. So tell me about your judo. What were your favorite techniques? What were your strategies? What made you an Olympian? What made you really good at judo?
Aside from the nonstop training, my coach at the time, I think if you remember back in like the late 90s, mid 90s to early 2000s, the Cubans, the French, and the Japanese were toe to toe. And so my coach was from Cuba, and he was pretty much self-taught. Avila Garcia was self-taught. And I don't know. I mean, he understood my body type. And so Cubans, a lot of drops. So a lot of drop steos, a lot of drop sodes. Back then, obviously, we were a lot of utilized legs. So sode was my favorite technique. But surprisingly, so I actually really loved the Georgian grip in practice. I really loved, for me, I was more of an opportunist, to be honest with you. I ensured that I had grip control, and I always coin this term, the fritz. Like, I wait for the person to start getting frustrated with their gripping strategies. And there's always an opening. That's usually like a 2 to 5 second window period where they aren't thinking clearly. And so I would make sure that I would overexert myself from a gripping strategy and gain so much control in the grip game that I would see that movement of struggle. And the second that they would start changing their patterns of movement, I would just slide in and take over. But Sode was my key throw. That was my bread and butter majority of the time, but I did a lot of combinations with that throw, to Ouchi, to Kouchi, to Kataguruma. And I was also ambidextrous. So it was a little bit easier to fight people, whether they're lefty or righty. Because my coach was really big on ensuring that I could fight equally from both sides.
Yeah.
Now I know things have changed a little bit. It bums me out, I think, especially from like an international stage. There's a gentleman that I talk to sometimes. He has a podcast as well. And one of his podcasts, he talked about the IOC needs judo, not the other way around. And so they've altered so many of the rule sets to eliminate a lot of different throws. it's not fun. I don't know. I enjoy watching judo still, very, very much so, but as from a practitioner standpoint, it's a little less fun not be able to do some of the things that we used to be able to do.
So why do you think they changed it? Why do you think they took that out?
I don't know. I've heard from other individuals that essentially the IOC complained that it was looking too similar to wrestling and they wanted to distinguish it. But, you know, a lot of different things happen too. Like I saw, for example, one of my former buddies of mine, Taraji Williams Murray. I remember, I don't know if it was in '08 or '04. He basically did a major upset with a Japanese player, and it involved a double leg and a pickup, a wrestling pickup that Roddy Ferguson was pretty famous for. And I don't know, there's a lot of politics involved in judo also, and a lot of nepotism. And unfortunately, that's just the state of human beings. I worked in government for a really long time, and nepotism and the politics and the selfishness sort of changes the wholesomeness of what it should be, I guess. What's your point of view on that? I'm curious.
They were always making adjustments throughout the years, you know, with the gis that were, you know, it was really short, you know, back in the 80s and 90s where it was like, you know,
I remember those. I was like, up to here.
Oh man, yeah, and we all would take them to our tailors and you know, get them cut up and measured exactly what it could be like. And then you're fighting these guys that are like, it was like they had like a diving suit on or something. It was like you could barely grab it. But yeah, they I guess they did that. People take advantage of it. They had to change it because, you know, the judo changed because of the gi length and the tightness and things like that. The evolution of it, it's interesting. I think all sports go through that at some level. I think it's just pretty drastic. You know, I can see, okay, your gi length should be longer because you can grab, you know, better and better throws, whatever, right? Yeah, it's interesting. The politics, it sounds like it's bigger than a bread box when it comes to some of that. There's more reasons than just one.
Yeah, I think if there were a lot less drastic moves, then it would be a little bit more relevant to the evolutionary process of the sport itself. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I remember that. I remember like pushing my shoulders back a lot, you know, when they would do your measurements just to sort of trick the system. And when you think about that from a judo standpoint, that's not really an integrity. But you get so wrapped up in winning and just having a little bit of an edge that it almost becomes this like communal understanding of what everybody's doing. So at least everyone's on the same page, I guess. And you can't, I think for me, the reason it's so much fun now is I get to actually experiment with things that I wasn't necessarily permitted to, weighing 48 kilos or permitted to based on my coach's style of coaching. There are a lot of throws that I actually really enjoyed to do in practice and was successful with, but my coach might have not necessarily wanted me to take a chance with. So now, I mean, if I do randori, it's fun. There's a different type of passion because it's not as, like you said, there's a lot of pressure that comes when you're competing on those levels, and it does suck some of the joy out of it. You know, the socialization, the traveling brings it back. You know, the competition life brings it back, but ultimately, there is something that gets slightly taken from it when you are competing and training at those levels that you do get back in as an adult. I don't know. It's a really special sport, and above all else, the way that it makes your brain think in terms of analytics and strategy, it's a blast for me. Like I don't know. My brain cannot do anything else but judo. Judo is the only thing that provides that kind of strategic thinking. Mm-hmm. Almost more so qualitative reasoning. It's hard to explain what it does, but it's just a feeling that you get when you're trying to strategize that nothing else can provide.
Yeah, I think the creativity, the ability to be able to like see somebody's their technique and their strategy, and having so much experience to be able to kind of pick it apart and help them. I find that really fun. You can see certain things now you couldn't see before because you're more experienced, and then get in there and say try it this way, and then it works. It's like, oh, that's very cool,
And your ego's gone when you're an adult. So like I remember just being so afraid to get thrown because it would chip off my ego a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm the best and I'm not supposed to get thrown. And so I never wanted to take chances or go outside the box. And now I can care less if anybody throws me. I'm 40 years old. I have multiple injuries, like, woohoo, good for you. You throw me and you say, hooray, I threw an Olympic, congratulations. Or throwing a
Yeah.
40-year-old baby who's just having fun doing judo. So it's a different frame of mind, because you're always in that competitive spirit when you're training. It's a different mindset. It's a different mindset
Yeah.
for sure.
You mentioned kind of moving forward in your judo career now. You mentioned like to me, the Judo Athlete Alliance system. How's that benefit judokas?
Well, for me, I think like especially with the 2028 coming up, it's kind of like a bat signal that be sent out to all the black belts all over the country. I noticed that there's a lot of clubs that have 5 to 6 different black belts, and for me, now that I've kind of turned the page into the recreational stuff, I'm again really big on spreading the sport in a variety of ways. I mean, we have the college programs here. I have an after-school program at a school locally. I do private sessions with individuals. Have a lot of different affiliations with different locations where we're not really competitors against each other. We're just trying to show what judo can provide. And I think this is kind of a crucial thing with the Athlete Alliance is understanding, like, even if you go to a school and teach judo once a week, it's cheap. It's very, an economical thing, and it gives you something to do as an adult. But aside of that, I'm working with like an app developer right now with a young man named Mikhail Vargas to try to, because the alliance is broken between, USA Judo, USAF, USAA. And I think USAF and USAA have an opportunity to really, really grow grassroots judo and kind of come together as two separate organizations and work with a grassroots alliance and kind of let USA Judo do their thing as far as the competitive stage is concerned, and allow our athletes to really have a fan base to come home to in 2028. I think that's absolutely crucial because it was a lonely existence coming home from the Olympics and realizing that you made all of these sacrifices in your life that really were just for you. And I had a judo program, every day after school. I still taught judo, and that was important for me. But again, there's a lot to be said about some of the things that Jimmy Pedro has talked about. Sometimes we're too humble in judo, and I think that we're afraid to be economically driven with the sport. Mm-hmm. And every other sport is, so I don't really understand why we're the exception to the rule. So for the Athlete Alliance, it's just about seeing who's out there, who wants to start doing judo again, who has a business that they might want to share. Kind of like almost I know like I have a friend of mine, he's a Freemason. And they only do business with each other. They don't do business with anybody outside of their organization. And because it keeps people within the organization. Well, hey, you might not want to do judo anymore, but guess what? So-and-so is a realtor, and he's a former judoka. Or like I have an athlete that I'm doing case management services with right now, and I hooked her up with a former judoka who's a police officer who's going to do a ride along with. So there's other ways for us as a community to come together and maintain a level of strength that we need in order to love the sport and make our athletes feel a little bit more appreciated, especially when they're done with their careers and don't really know what to do from it. There's a lot of grit that we do get, and we know that like no matter what, they're going to persevere. But I think that that judo has a lot more to give than what we're willing to admit, because everybody is so humble in the sport for the most part. There's some, there's always bad apples in every avenue. I'm hopeful. Probably too idealistic about it, but start small and work our way up. So hopefully we'll get there.
I appreciate you coming on. This was wonderful. I think it's really interesting to talk about this stuff and hear your perspective on everything. I'd love to have you on again for sure. So how can we reach you?
All my information is on my website. It's pretty simple. It's just thejudocommunity.com. And it has my contact information.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Laura. And we'll talk again.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
All right. Take care.